Beneath the shifting sands of time, entire worlds lie hidden, cities swallowed by the desert, their streets silent, their stories waiting to be told. Picture this: you're standing on a sun-scorched dune, the wind whispering secrets of what once thrived below. Unseen beneath your feet, a bustling metropolis sleeps, its grand plazas, intricate waterways, and towering temples preserved like a snapshot of ancient ambition. These buried cities aren't just relics of the past, they're time capsules, holding the dreams of the people who built them. What if I told you that the layout of these lost cities, the way their streets curve, how their buildings cluster, reveals more than just stone and mortar? It unveils the very soul of a civilization, their ideals etched into the earth. Think about the cities we live in today, the skyscrapers, the parks, the subway lines weaving beneath our feet. Every detail was planned, debated, dreamed up. Now, imagine unraveling that same process for a city 2,000 years old. That's exactly what archaeologists do when they uncover these ancient urban blueprints. From the sprawling grid of Mohenjo-Daro to the sacred symmetry of Egypt's buried capitals, these designs weren't accidental. They were statements about power, about community, about how people saw their place in the universe. A temple wasn't just a temple, it was a bridge between earth and the divine. A marketplace wasn't just for trade, it was the heartbeat of daily life. And when these cities vanished, their secrets didn't. They just waited. So what can these ghostly city plans teach us, more than you might think? The way ancient builders harnessed water in the desert, the way they designed streets to catch the breeze, these weren't just clever tricks. They were revolutions in urban living, solutions to problems we still grapple with today. As we peel back the layers of sand, we're not just uncovering lost history, we're rediscovering timeless wisdom. This journey isn't just about the past, it's about understanding how the echoes of these ancient ideals still shape our world. So let's dig deeper, literally and figuratively, into the secrets beneath the sand, and discover what these buried cities reveal about the dreams of those who came before us. The desert has kept their secrets long enough. It's time to listen. There's something undeniably magnetic about lost cities, a pull that goes beyond mere curiosity. Maybe it's the way they force us to confront the fragility of human achievement, or how they whisper promises of secrets just out of reach. Take Pompeii, frozen in a single catastrophic moment. Bread left in ovens, frescoes still bright, sandals imprinted in ash. It's not just a ruin, it's a heartbeat preserved. Then there's Atlantis, a legend so potent it blurs the line between myth and memory. Whether real or imagined, these places tap into a universal question: what happens when a civilization vanishes? And what can its remains teach us? Archaeologists don't just study these sites for their artifacts, they're piecing together the DNA of ancient societies. When a city is buried suddenly, like Pompeii, or abandoned slowly, like the Maya's jungle-covered metropolises, it leaves behind a raw, unfiltered record. There are no historians curating the narrative, no rulers rewriting their legacies. Just the unvarnished truth of how people lived, what they traded, how they worshipped, even how they argued. A broken pot in a marketplace tells us about trade routes. The alignment of a temple reveals celestial beliefs. Every street corner is a chapter in a story we're still learning to read. But here's what's truly remarkable: these cities weren't haphazard. They were deliberate, even visionary. The grid of Mohenjo-Daro wasn't just efficient, it was a declaration of order in a chaotic world. The raised walkways of Venice's ancient predecessors weren't just practical, They were a defiance of nature. These planners didn't just build for the present, they built for ideals they believed would endure. And in a way, they were right. When we walk their streets today, we're not just seeing stones, we're seeing ambition, faith, community, the very things that still define our cities now. The sand may have swallowed them, but their lessons, those refuse to stay buried. Mohenjo-Daro isn't just an ancient city, it's a masterclass in urban design, a 4,000-year-old blueprint for how to build a civilization that thrives. Picture walking down its wide, straight streets, lined with houses made of perfectly uniform bricks, each one a testament to a society that valued precision down to the smallest detail. This wasn't a city that just happened. It was a city that was planned with an almost mathematical obsession with order. Every street intersected at right angles, forming neat blocks that would feel familiar to anyone living in a modern grid-based metropolis today. But here's what's astonishing. Mohenjo-Daro's planners didn't just think about aesthetics or ease of navigation. They engineered their city to function flawlessly, with a drainage system so advanced it put some modern infrastructure to shame. Covered gutters ran beneath the streets, funneling wastewater away from homes and public spaces, a clear sign that hygiene and public health weren't afterthoughts. They were central to the city's design. What does this tell us about the people who built it? They weren't just skilled craftsmen. They were visionaries who understood that a city is more than a collection of buildings. It's a living system where every element, from the width of a street to the slope of a drain, has a purpose. Unlike later cities that grew haphazardly, with winding alleys and cramped quarters, Mohenjo-Daro's layout speaks of a society that prized efficiency and equality. The uniformity of the bricks suggests centralized production, almost like an ancient version of mass manufacturing. Even the homes, while varying in size, followed similar designs, hinting at a culture where even domestic life adhered to shared standards. This wasn't just urban planning, it was urban philosophy, a belief that harmony could be baked into the very bones of a city. And then there's the silence. Mohenjo-Daro's ruins offer no grand temples or towering palaces, no obvious monuments to kings or conquests. Instead, we find public wells, bathing platforms, and assembly hall spaces meant for collective use. It's as if the city itself was the monument, a testament to the idea that a society's greatness lies not in its rulers, but in its people. That's what makes this place so revolutionary. While other ancient cultures built pyramids and ziggurats to touch the heavens, Mohenjo-Daro's architects kept their eyes firmly on the earth, crafting a city that worked for its inhabitants. The precision of its grid isn't just impressive, it's profound, a reminder that the best urban designs don't just organize space, they elevate human life. So why does this matter today? Because Mohenjo-Daro forces us to rethink our assumptions about progress. We often imagine ancient societies as primitive steps on the way to our modern brilliance. But here's a city that mastered principles we still struggle with: equitable access to resources, sustainable infrastructure, and a built environment that serves everyone. When we look at its streets, we're not just seeing the past, we're seeing a challenge. If they could get it right 4 millennia ago, what's our excuse? The street layout of Teotihuacán wasn't just about getting from one place to another. It was a mirror of the cosmos itself. Walk down the Avenue of the Dead today, and you're tracing a path that ancient builders designed as a terrestrial echo of the Milky Way. Each massive pyramid lining the avenue isn't merely an architectural feat. It's a carefully placed marker, aligning with celestial events like the setting sun on the summer solstice or the movement of Venus across the night sky. This wasn't urban planning as we think of it today. It was something far more profound, a sacred act of weaving the heavens into the very fabric of daily life. Take the Pyramid of the Sun, for instance. Its staggering size dominates the landscape, but what's truly remarkable is its precision. The structure's corners align almost perfectly with the cardinal directions north, south, east, west, a feat requiring astronomical knowledge that would have taken generations to refine. And it wasn't just about celestial mechanics. The pyramid's placement, along with the nearby Pyramid of the Moon, created a ceremonial axis that guided rituals, processions, and the rhythm of civic life. Imagine living in a city where your morning walk to the market took you past structures that doubled as cosmic calendars, where every shadow cast by a temple at noon told you not just the time, but the season. This wasn't just architecture, it was a dialogue with the universe. But here's what's even more striking. Teotihuacan's designers didn't see a divide between the spiritual and the practical. The same reservoirs that held water for the city's inhabitants were shaped to reflect the stars. Sewers and drainage channels followed sacred geometries, turning mundane infrastructure into acts of devotion. Even the apartment compounds home to thousands of ordinary citizens were arranged in clusters that mirrored constellations. For the people of Teotihuacan, the sacred wasn't confined to temples or special occasions. It was baked into the streets they walked, the walls that sheltered them, the very air they breathed. Modern cities could learn something from this harmony. Today, we often treat functionality and meaning as separate concerns. A subway line is just a way to commute, a park just a place to relax. But Teotihuacan reminds us that urban spaces can serve deeper purposes without sacrificing utility. What if our skyscrapers didn't just scrape the sky but connected us to it? What if our public squares weren't just open spaces but places designed to inspire awe and reflection? The genius of Teotihuacan wasn't just in its grandeur, but in its ability to make the cosmic feel local, to turn every stone into a story. And then there's the mystery of its decline. A city this meticulously planned, this deeply intertwined with the rhythms of nature, didn't fall to chaos overnight. Some scholars believe its collapse came from within, a slow unraveling of the social and spiritual fabric that had held it together. It's a haunting thought that even the most intentional cities, the ones built to mirror eternity, are fragile. But perhaps that's the most enduring lesson of all. Teotihuacan's ruins don't just show us how to build a city that honors the divine. They whisper a warning about what happens when we forget that cities, no matter how grand, are ultimately made for people. The stones may align with the stars, but it's the lives within them that give them meaning. Petra's rose-red cliffs don't just hide tombs and temples, they conceal one of antiquity's most astonishing feats of engineering. Imagine a city carved into sheer rock, surrounded by arid desert, yet bursting with gardens, fountains, and public baths. How the answer lies beneath your feet, in a labyrinth of channels, dams, and cisterns so advanced they'd put modern water systems to shame. While Petra's grand facades steal the spotlight, its true brilliance is invisible, a network of aqueducts and reservoirs that turned this barren landscape into an oasis. This wasn't just survival, it was defiance. Every drop of water harvested from flash floods, every tunnel carved to redirect a stream, was a testament to human ingenuity thriving against the odds. The Nabateans didn't just adapt to their environment, they mastered it. Their secret, a deep understanding of water's movement, honed over generations. They carved channels into cliff faces to catch runoff from rare rains, guiding it through ceramic pipes that minimized evaporation. They built terraces to slow erosion and cisterns hidden beneath city squares, ensuring no precious liquid was wasted. Even their famous treasury, with its ornate facade, served a dual purpose. Its upper levels funneled rainwater into underground chambers, a marriage of beauty and utility. This wasn't haphazard trial and error. It was precision hydrology, a science refined centuries before the modern era. What's truly remarkable is how Petra's water system reflects a philosophy far ahead of its time. Unlike Rome's aqueducts, which flaunted imperial power, Petra's infrastructure was subtle, woven seamlessly into the natural world. The Nabateans didn't conquer their environment, they collaborated with it, using gravity and geology as allies. Their cisterns weren't just storage, they were climate control, cooling homes in scorching summers. Their channels weren't just conduits, they were filters with settling tanks to purify water before it reached drinking fountains. This wasn't just engineering, it was empathy for the ecosystem, a lesson we're still grappling with today. Modern cities facing water scarcity could learn from Petra's playbook. While we rely on energy-intensive desalination plants, the Nabateans achieved sustainability with zero carbon footprint. Their methods required no pumps, no fossil fuels, just an intimate knowledge of the land and a willingness to work within its limits. There's a humility in that approach we've lost. We build dams that disrupt rivers, they built channels that honored them. We pave over watersheds, they carved reservoirs into mountainsides. Petra's ruins whisper a radical idea, that the most advanced civilizations aren't those that dominate nature, but those that listen to it. And then there's the irony. Petra's decline began when Roman conquerors modernized its water system, replacing delicate Nabatean channels with brute force aqueducts. The very innovations meant to improve the city disrupted its delicate balance, leaving it vulnerable to droughts it once weathered effortlessly. There's a warning in that. Today, as we race to solve environmental crises with high-tech fixes, Petra reminds us that sometimes the most sophisticated solutions are the ones that blend invisibly into the world around us. The Nabateans didn't just build a city, they built a dialogue with the desert, one we do well to overhear. High in the mist-shrouded Andes, Machu Picchu clings to the mountainside like a stone orchid, a city that doesn't just occupy space but dances with it. Unlike the flat, sprawling grids of most ancient urban centers, this Inca masterpiece embraces the vertical, turning sheer cliffs into neighborhoods and steep slopes into fertile farms. Every terrace, every staircase, every building isn't just placed, it's woven into the mountain's bones. This wasn't just architecture, it was a conversation with the earth, a testament to a culture that saw topography not as an obstacle, but as a collaborator. Take the agricultural terraces, for instance. These weren't mere steps carved into hillsides, they were feats of geoengineering. Each level acted as a microclimate, with deeper soils at the bottom for crops needing richer ground and shallower beds higher up for hardier plants. The Incas didn't just flatten the land, they choreographed it, using stone retaining walls to control erosion, regulate temperature, and even recycle rainwater through hidden channels. Modern permaculture advocates would nod in recognition. This was sustainability written in stone, centuries before the term existed, and it worked so well that these terraces still function today, long after their builders vanished. Then there's the city's sacred heart, the Temple of the Sun, with its curved wall hugging a natural rock outcrop, wasn't just built near the mountain, it became part of it. During solstices, sunlight pierces its windows with laser precision, striking ceremonial niches like celestial spotlighting. The Intihuatana stone, often called the hitching post of the sun, wasn't just a ritual object, it was a solar observatory, its angles calibrated to mark equinoxes and guide planting cycles. Even the residential quarters, stacked like stone shelves along the slopes, were positioned to catch morning light while avoiding harsh winds. Every element served multiple purposes: spiritual, practical, ecological. What's revolutionary about Machu Picchu isn't just its beauty, it's its philosophy. While modern cities often bulldoze hills and reroute rivers to fit rigid plans, the Incas asked, how can we build with what's already here? Their answer was a city that followed the land's contours like a second skin. Staircases zigzagged where the rock allowed, plazas nestled into natural plateaus, and buildings used the mountain's own bulk as insulation against the cold. This wasn't just adaptation, it was reverence. The Incas didn't see nature as raw material to dominate, but as a partner to honor. Today, as urban planners grapple with climate change and overcrowding, Machu Picchu offers a masterclass in resilience. Its terraces prevented landslides, a lesson for cities now facing erosion from deforestation. Its passive heating and cooling techniques, using strategic ventilation and thermal mass, could reduce energy dependence in glass and steel metropolises. Even its compact, vertical footprint is a blueprint for today's push toward denser, greener urban living. The irony, we're just catching up to ideas perfected 600 years ago. And perhaps that's the most humbling truth. Machu Picchu wasn't a lonely outlier. It was part of a vast network of Inca settlements that all shared this vertical vision. From Ollantaytambo's fortress-like terraces to the cliffside granaries of Choqquequirao, these cities whisper a challenge across the centuries. Why fight the land when you can learn from it? The stones of Machu Picchu don't just tell us how the Incas built. They ask us how we might rebuild, with humility, with harmony, with the wisdom that sometimes the best way forward is to look up. Athens' Agora didn't just host merchants haggling over olives and pottery. It incubated ideas that would shake the ancient world. Picture this open square buzzing with philosophers debating under colonnades, citizens casting votes on broken pottery shards, and ordinary Athenians gathering to shape laws affecting thousands. This wasn't accidental urban planning. It was architectural alchemy, turning stone and space into engines of democracy. Unlike the towering ziggurats of Mesopotamia or Egypt's walled temple complexes, Athens' power center was flat, accessible, and inviting, a radical statement that leadership belonged in the crowd, not above it. The genius of the Agora lay in its deliberate design to foster chance encounters. Covered walkways called stoas provided shade for impromptu discussions, while the central altar served as both religious site and civic landmark. Even the placement of monuments whispered democratic ideals. Statues honored military heroes alongside playwrights and legislators, blending cultural and political achievement. Compare this to Persepolis, where towering staircases led to isolated audience halls, reinforcing the Persian king's godlike remove. Athens' planners understood something revolutionary. That equality isn't just proclaimed, it's engineered into the sidewalks where sandals scuff and voices carry. Consider the tholos, the agora's unassuming round building where 50 citizens chosen by lottery ate together daily. Its circular shape wasn't just aesthetic, it eliminated hierarchy with no head table or privileged sightlines. Nearby, the Bima speakers platform faced the open square, forcing orators to address the city as peers rather than subjects. These spatial choices cultivated habits of participation, turning abstract concepts like isonomia, equality before law, into lived experience. When citizens grew accustomed to speaking freely in the Agora, they carried that expectation into the assembly on Phoenix Hill, proof that democratic muscles are strengthened by everyday urban gymnasiums. Modern civic planners could learn from this interplay of space and psychology. Today's city squares often prioritize commerce or passive spectacle over engagement. But Athens reminds us that benches arranged for conversation, paths that meander past public art, and mixed-use zones where politics, commerce, and culture collide aren't just pleasant features. They're the scaffolding of self-governance. The Agora's ruins challenge us. Does your city's design encourage debate in its DNA or merely consumption? When a teenager can overhear philosophers while buying bread, when a potter might pause to add amendments to proposed laws, democracy stops being theoretical and starts breathing in the spaces between people. Yet the Agora wasn't perfect. Its inclusivity had limits, excluding women, slaves, and non-citizens from full participation. But its enduring lesson isn't about who got access then, but about how physical environments shape social possibilities. Those sun-baked stones whisper that changing a society begins with rearranging its furniture, that revolutions don't always need barricades when they can build gathering places instead. Every time we design a park bench that faces outward rather than inward, every time we replace a gated plaza with an open one, we're continuing a conversation Athens started 2.5 millennia ago. The Agora's true legacy isn't in its ruined columns, but in the stubborn idea that equality isn't just written in laws. It's walked in streets, shouted in squares, and carved into the very bones of a city. Rome's cobbled streets weren't just pathways, they were the iron threads of an empire, stitching together conquests from Britain to Babylon. Walk along the Appian Way even today, and you can feel it, the unyielding straightness of the stones, engineered to move legions at breathtaking speed. This wasn't just infrastructure, it was psychological warfare in pavement form. Every mile of road whispered the same message to subject territories: Rome is everywhere and Rome is watching. But here's the twist: while these roads were tools of control, they also pulsed with unexpected life. Traders transported silks from China, scholars shared ideas between Alexandria and Hispania, and ordinary citizens gained mobility unimaginable in earlier eras. The very networks built to dominate became veins of connection, proving that even the most calculated systems can spark unintended revolutions. Then there were the aqueducts, those soaring arches that turned water into a weapon of soft power. When Roman engineers built the Aqua Claudia, they weren't just solving a practical problem, they were staging a spectacle. Imagine being a conquered tribe seeing water defying gravity, cascading through tiered fountains in the Forum. It was a display of technological superiority designed to awe, to make resistance seem futile. Yet for all their theatricality, these aqueducts delivered something real: clean water to over 1 million people, public baths that fostered hygiene, and a standard of living unmatched for centuries. The genius of Rome lay in this duality: oppression and benevolence flowing from the same source, like the water itself. Nowhere was this balance more striking than in the Forum Romanum. Unlike Athens' Agora, which encouraged debate, Rome's central plaza was a theater of hierarchy. Temples to deified emperors loomed over law courts, their steps worn by petitioners seeking favor from elites. The rostra, the speaker's platform, faced statues of military heroes, reinforcing that authority came from conquest, not consensus. Yet amid this orchestrated grandeur, ordinary Romans found pockets of agency. Market stalls squeezed between basilicas, graffiti scrawled on walls mocking politicians, and the chaotic energy of festivals where social norms temporarily inverted. Even in a space designed to glorify power, humanity bubbled up through the cracks. What modern cities inherit from Rome isn't just engineering prowess, it's the tension between control and community. Today's highways trace their lineage to those ancient roads, moving armies of commuters instead of legions. Skyscrapers mirror imperial monuments, projecting corporate might just as temples once flaunted divine favor. But the lesson isn't in the similarities, it's in the contradictions. Rome shows us that urban spaces are never just one thing. A boulevard can be both a military asset and a carnival route. A reservoir can intimidate and uplift. The true test of a city isn't whether it serves power or people, but whether it can, however imperfectly, do both. Perhaps that's why Rome's ruins still captivate. They don't just represent a fallen empire, they embody an eternal urban dilemma. How much order is too much? How much spectacle crosses into oppression? The answers aren't in the stones themselves, but in the lives they shaped. When we walk past a remnant of an aqueduct or stand in the shadow of a broken column, we're not just seeing history. We're seeing a mirror held up to every city that's tried to balance grandeur with grit, control with compassion. Rome's greatest legacy isn't its engineering, it's the question it leaves hanging in the air. Who is your city really for? Cahokia's towering Monk's Mound rises from the Mississippi floodplain like a silent question. How could a city this powerful, this sprawling, simply empty itself? At its height around the year 1100, this was the beating heart of North America, home to tens of thousands, with plazas larger than 40 football fields and a skyline dominated by earthen pyramids. Then, within centuries, it was gone. Not sacked by invaders, not buried by ash, but abandoned. The mystery isn't just what happened to Cahokia, but why, and what its vanishing act says about the lifespan of cities everywhere. Look closer at those mounds. They weren't just piles of dirt, they were precise astronomical instruments. The Grand Plaza aligns with the cardinal directions, while Woodhenge, a circle of towering red cedar posts, marked solstices and equinoxes with eerie accuracy. This was a city deeply attuned to natural cycles, yet it couldn't outrun them. Clues emerge from the soil. Tree rings show brutal droughts in the 1300s, while archaeological layers reveal floods that drowned entire neighborhoods. But here's the twist: Cahokia had weathered environmental shocks before. Its collapse wasn't just about nature's whims, it was about how those pressures exposed human fractures. Dig into the trash pits and the story gets darker. In later layers, elite compounds show signs of fortified walls, while communal grain stores vanish, evidence of a society turning inward, hoarding rather than sharing. Burials reveal increasing violence, mass graves with bodies bearing arrow wounds and blunt force trauma. The very things that made Cahokia strong, its centralized authority, its grand public works, may have sowed its downfall. When crisis came, the social contract crumbled faster than the levees. Yet Cahokia's legacy isn't just a cautionary tale. Modern cities face eerily similar stresses: rising waters, fractured trust, infrastructure straining under climate extremes. The difference: we're reading Cahokia's diary while there's still time to change the ending. Its mounds aren't just ruins, they're mirrors, forcing us to ask which of our own gleaming towers might become tomorrow's mysteries. When archaeologists sift through our foundations centuries from now, what will they say we valued and what we failed to protect? Great Zimbabwe stone towers rise from the African savanna like silent sentinels of a forgotten economic empire. These aren't just ruins, they're receipts, proof of transactions that stretched across continents. Imagine standing in the shadow of the great enclosure's 30-foot walls, their chevron patterns catching the sunlight, and realizing you're looking at the ancient equivalent of a stock exchange. This city wasn't just built on rock, it was built on trade. Its very layout a map of connections spanning the Indian Ocean and beyond. The curved passageways winding through its stone complexes weren't just architectural flourishes, they were carefully designed to funnel goods, people, and ideas into a thriving marketplace at the heart of southern Africa. What makes Great Zimbabwe extraordinary isn't just the scale of its stonework, but what that stonework reveals about its place in the world. Archaeologists have unearthed Chinese celadon pottery, Persian glass beads, and even fragments of Indian textiles in its ruins, artifacts that tell a story of a city plugged into medieval globalization. The famous conical tower, long shrouded in mystery, likely wasn't a religious monument but a granary, its imposing presence advertising the kingdom's wealth in gold, ivory, and most crucially grain. In a region where food security meant power, Great Zimbabwe didn't just trade luxury items, it mastered the art of turning agricultural surplus into economic leverage. Walk through the hill complex and you'll notice something peculiar: the absence of defensive walls. Unlike European castles or Middle Eastern citadels hunkered behind fortifications, Great Zimbabwe's elite lived in open, terraced structures overlooking the city. This wasn't oversight, it was confidence. Their security came not from moats or battlements, but from relationships. The same trade networks that brought Arabian incense to their altars also created interdependence with distant partners. Attack one link in this chain and you risked cutting off others, a lesson in economic diplomacy that feels startlingly modern. The city's decline holds another insight. When Portuguese explorers arrived in the 1500s, they found the stone towers already abandoned. Climate change likely played a role. Tree rings showed devastating droughts in the 1400s, but there's more to the story. As European ships began circumnavigating Africa, the old overland trade routes that had fed Great Zimbabwe's prosperity withered. The city didn't collapse because it failed, but because the world changed around it. Sound familiar? Today's cities face similar disruptions as digital marketplaces reshape physical commerce and climate shifts redraw economic maps. Perhaps that's why Great Zimbabwe's ruins resonate so deeply now. They remind us that cities aren't just places, they're processes, living systems that thrive or falter based on their ability to connect. Those stone walls didn't just enclose space, they curated flows of gold, of grain, of knowledge. In an age where a single undersea cable can make or break a metropolis, Great Zimbabwe whispers across 7 centuries. Your true foundations aren't in your buildings, but in your relationships. The towers may be empty now, but their lesson echoes louder than ever. No city is an island, no matter how high its walls. The walls of Jericho didn't just keep people out, they marked the moment humanity chose to stay. Rising from the arid plains of the Jordan Valley over 10,000 years ago, these stone barriers weren't merely practical. They were a declaration, a physical manifesto of a revolutionary idea: we belong here. Before Jericho, humans followed herds and seasons, living in temporary shelters that left no trace. But those walls, some reaching 13 feet high, with towers looming even higher, changed everything. They weren't just defending a settlement, they were defining what a settlement could be. For the first time in history, a community had drawn a line in the sand and said, "This is ours." Look closer at those stones and you'll find something surprising. Unlike later fortifications built to repel armies, Jericho's earliest walls show no signs of battle scars. Their purpose wasn't just military, it was psychological. By encircling their homes, Jericho's inhabitants weren't just protecting their bodies, they were safeguarding their identity. The walls created a container for shared rituals, for granaries that stored collective harvests, for homes that passed between generations. This wasn't just architecture, it was the birth of the very concept of hometown. The towers, with their internal staircases, may have served as watchposts, but they also functioned as community landmarks, early skyscrapers announcing permanence in a world of transience. Yet Jericho's walls also whisper a paradox we still grapple with today. The same barriers that fostered security also created separation, an us inside, a them outside. Sound familiar? Modern cities still wrestle with this tension, from gated communities to national borders. The instinct to build walls hasn't faded, it's evolved. Consider Berlin's now vanished barrier or the proposed border fences of today. Each iteration asks the same question Jericho did: how do we balance safety with openness? How thick must a wall be to protect without isolating? What's haunting is how Jericho's story ends. After millennia of continuous habitation, the city was abandoned, not by conquest but by climate. As the region dried, the walls that once symbolized resilience became relics. There's a lesson in that. Cities thrive when their boundaries serve people, not the other way around. When walls grow rigid, when they prioritize exclusion over adaptation, even the mightiest stones crumble. Jericho's ruins don't just show us where urban life began. They remind us that the best defenses aren't walls that keep the world out, but foundations flexible enough to let the future in. Tenochtitlan didn't just rise from a lake, it danced with it. Picture a city where streets were waterways, where crops grew on islands woven from reeds and mud, where causeways stretched like fingers across the water, connecting neighborhoods to a grand ceremonial center. This wasn't urban planning as we know it. It was alchemy turning the Aztecs' most daunting challenge, a shallow, marshy lake, into their greatest advantage. The secret lay in the chinampas, those floating gardens that transformed Tenochtitlan into a self-sustaining marvel. Imagine plots of land anchored to the lakebed by willow trees, their roots knitting together to create fertile mats where corn, beans, and squash thrived. These weren't just farms, they were ecosystems with canals between them acting as irrigation ditches and fish nurseries. A circular economy centuries before the term existed. But the genius didn't stop at agriculture. Tenochtitlan's canals served as highways, bustling with canoes carrying everything from volcanic stone for temples to cocoa beans for royalty. Unlike the rigid grids of Roman cities, this was a fluid metropolis, its layout shaped by the rhythms of water rather than the whims of emperors. The Aztecs didn't fight their environment, they listened to it. When seasonal floods threatened, they built dikes with gates to control water levels. When saltwater seeped in from nearby lakes, they engineered a freshwater aqueduct from springs on the mainland. Every solution emerged from collaboration with the landscape, not conquest of it. What's startling is how modern Tenochtitlan feels. Today's cities grapple with rising sea levels and sinking foundations, yet here was a civilization that thrived because it embraced water, not in spite of it. The chinampas produced up to 7 harvests a year more productive than most contemporary farms, while their porous structure filtered pollutants naturally. Compare that to modern concrete jungles, where stormwater runoff overwhelms sewers and asphalt amplifies heat. Tenochtitlan's planners understood something we're still relearning. Resilience isn't about building higher walls against nature, but about designing with nature's logic. Then there's the social dimension. The chinampas weren't just practical, they were egalitarian. Most families tended their own plots, with surplus going to markets that fed the city's 200,000 residents. This decentralized system created food security without dependency on distant supply chains, a lesson for today's climate-vulnerable megacities. Even the causeways, often described as military infrastructure, doubled as communal spaces, lined with shrines and vendors, blurring the line between utility and spirituality. The tragedy, of course, is that we almost lost this wisdom. Spanish conquerors drained the lake, paving over canals to impose a European vision of urban order. But Tenochtitlan's ghost lingers in the wetlands of Xochimilco, where chinampas still operate today, and in the blue-green infrastructure movements of cities like Amsterdam and Bangkok, finally recognizing that water is a partner, not a foe. The Aztecs didn't just build a city, they wrote a manifesto in reeds and mud, one that whispers across 5 centuries. The most radical innovation isn't new technology, it's old wisdom rediscovered. Xi'an's grid of streets wasn't just orderly, it was a mirror of the heavens themselves. As the eastern anchor of the Silk Road, this ancient capital didn't just welcome traders and travelers, it announced the emperor's divine right to rule through every brick and boulevard. Walk its central axis even today, and you're tracing a path deliberately aligned with the North Star, a celestial tether connecting earthly power to cosmic order. The city's near-perfect symmetry, its gates, its temples, its markets all balanced like weights on a scale wasn't just aesthetic. It was ideology carved in stone, a physical manifesto declaring that harmony on Earth reflected harmony in the universe. The genius of Xi'an's design lies in its layers of meaning. Take the city walls stretching over 8 miles in a near-perfect rectangle. To a visiting merchant from Samarkand, they signaled security and stability, reassurance that goods stored here were safe. But to the emperor's astronomers, those same walls framed an astronomical instrument. The 4 main gates corresponded to the cardinal directions, while watchtowers doubled as observation points for tracking solstices and planetary movements. Even the thickness of the walls held significance, thicker at the base to symbolize the Earth's solidity, tapering upward toward the heavens. This wasn't just fortification, it was philosophy made tangible. At the city's heart stood the emperor's palace, positioned like the pole star around which all else revolved. From this nucleus, broad avenues radiated outward like spokes on a wheel, each leading to gates named after celestial phenomena, the gate of eternal harmony, the gate of manifest virtue. These weren't arbitrary labels, they were reminders that every official passing through them, every peasant bringing tribute, was participating in a cosmic hierarchy. The very act of walking Xi'an streets reinforced the social order: north-south avenues for imperial processions, east-west roads for commerce, each movement choreographed like planets in orbit. What's fascinating is how this cosmic vision accommodated earthly realities. The same rigid grid that imposed order also fostered serendipity. Persian glassblowers set up workshops near Central Asian fur traders, their wares spilling onto streets where Chinese scholars debated Confucian classics. The city's astronomical precision didn't stifle chaos. It provided a framework within which diversity could thrive. In this way, Xi'an anticipated an urban truth we're only now rediscovering: that the best cities aren't just functional machines, but ecosystems where structure and spontaneity coexist. Modern planners could learn from Xi'an's dual focus on symbolism and utility. Today's cities often prioritize efficiency over meaning, leaving residents adrift in concrete jungles with no narrative to anchor them. But Xi'an reminds us that urban spaces shape beliefs as much as behaviors. When a child grows up walking streets aligned with the stars, when a merchant unloads camels beneath a gate named for cosmic virtue, the abstract becomes lived experience. The stones whisper that a city isn't just a place to live, it's a story to inhabit, one that tells you who you are and where you fit in the grand scheme of things. Yet there's irony in Xi'an's legacy. The very cosmic order it celebrated was already shifting beneath its feet. As the Silk Road brought new ideas, Buddhism from India, Zoroastrianism from Persia, the rigid hierarchies encoded in its streets began to soften. The city that so meticulously mirrored the heavens couldn't prevent change on Earth. Perhaps that's its most enduring lesson, that no urban design, no matter how divinely inspired, can freeze time. Cities must breathe, adapt, and occasionally, like the stars themselves, realign. The harbor at Lothal wasn't just a place to moor boats, it was a symphony in brick and water, a feat of engineering so precise it could dance with the tides. Picture this, a city thriving 4,000 years ago on India's western coast, where merchants from Mesopotamia unloaded copper and timber while local artisans packed ivory and pearls into waiting ships. At its heart lay the world's first known tidal dock, a massive rectangular basin carved from kiln-fired bricks, its walls angled to withstand erosion while sluice gates harnessed the moon's pull to flush out silt naturally. This wasn't just infrastructure, it was poetry in motion, a testament to a civilization that understood the sea's rhythms like a language. What's astonishing is how Lothal's planners turned geography into opportunity. Built where the Sabarmati River once met the Arabian Sea, the city's entire layout revolved around water. Warehouses clustered near the dock, their raised foundations protecting goods from floods. Streets sloped gently toward drains lined with ceramic filters, an ancient answer to pollution. Even the bead-making workshops sat upwind of residential areas, their fumes carried safely away. Every detail spoke of a society that didn't just adapt to its environment but choreographed with it, anticipating challenges modern ports still grapple with today. The real revelation lies in Lothal's global connections. Seal stamps bearing Indus Valley script have been found as far as Oman and Bahrain, while weights and measures uncovered at the site match standards used in ancient Dilmun. This wasn't just trade, it was an early experiment in globalization with Lothal as the pulsating hub. Unlike later colonial ports built to extract wealth, Lothal thrived on reciprocity. Its beadmakers used carnelian from Gujarat and lapis from Afghanistan, creating finished goods more valuable than the sum of their parts, a Bronze Age lesson in adding value that economists would envy. Yet Lothal's greatest innovation might be its democratic design. Unlike the pyramid-centric cities of Egypt or the palace-dominated complexes of Mesopotamia, here was a city where workshops and docks took center stage. The absence of grandiose temples or towering monuments suggests something radical. A society where merchants and artisans held sway, where practicality trumped pageantry. Even the city's division into a citadel and lower town feels less about hierarchy and more about zoning crafts here, administration there, all connected by wide arterial roads that buzzed with activity. Modern maritime cities could learn from Lothal's legacy. As rising seas threaten coastal hubs from Miami to Mumbai, this ancient port offers a masterclass in resilience. Its dock's tidal engineering foreshadowed today's floodgates in Venice. Its raised warehouses inspired modern flood-proof storage. Even its mixed-use layout, where living, working, and trading spaces blended seamlessly, mirrors contemporary urbanist ideals. The irony, we're just catching up to ideas perfected millennia ago by architects whose names we'll never know. Lothal's silence today speaks volumes. When the river shifted course and the sea receded, the city didn't collapse in flames but faded gracefully, its people likely dispersing to new hubs. There's wisdom in that quiet exit, a reminder that the most enduring cities aren't those that fight nature's changes, but those that adapt to them. As cargo ships the size of skyscrapers now ply the same waters where Lothal's wooden hulls once sailed, its ruins pose a question: are we building ports for the ages or just for today? Rising above the dense Guatemalan canopy, Tikol's limestone temples pierce the sky like stone compass needles, each one carefully positioned to anchor not just spiritual life, but the entire city's rhythm. This wasn't a ceremonial center plopped on the outskirts. It pulsed at the heart of daily existence. Step into the Grand Plaza, and you'd find priests conducting rituals atop Temple Eye while vendors sold pottery in its shadow. Children played ball games in adjacent courts, and astronomers tracked Venus from nearby observatories. The sacred and mundane didn't just coexist here. They fed each other, creating an urban ecosystem where every activity, from market haggling to royal coronations, drew meaning from its connection to the divine. What's revolutionary about Tikol's design is how its causeways, those raised white roads cutting through the jungle, functioned as social stitching. Unlike modern highways that bypass neighborhoods, these pathways deliberately linked residential compounds to temples, ensuring that even the farthest farmer hauling maize to market would pass by vibrant murals depicting gods and ancestors. The message was unmistakable. Your labor, your trade, your very footsteps were part of a grander cosmic order. Archaeologists call this ritualized urbanism, where the act of walking to work became a pilgrimage, and a trip to the plaza doubled as participation in civic spirituality. Modern planners could learn from Tikal's mixed-use genius. Today's cities often zone spirituality into isolated churches or meditation centers, but the Maya understood that sacred spaces thrive when woven into everyday landscapes. Their towering pyramids weren't just for elites. Their bases hosted open-air markets. Their staircases served as communal gathering spots. Even the acoustics of the plazas were engineered. A clap at the base of Temple Roman 4 can be heard hundreds of feet away, turning casual conversations into shared experiences. This was participatory urban design at its finest, where architecture didn't just house life but amplified it. Yet Tikal's greatest lesson might be in its resilience. When droughts strained resources in the 9th century, neighborhoods closest to the ceremonial core held on longest. Why? Because their physical connection to the city's spiritual heart fostered collective problem-solving, a reminder that social cohesion isn't just feel-good theory, but survival strategy. Those stone causeways did more than move people. They moved ideas, resources, and ultimately hope. In our age of isolated suburbs and disconnected downtowns, Tikal whispers a radical truth. The most enduring cities aren't just built on strong foundations, but on strong bonds between earth and sky, between sacred and secular, between the stones beneath our feet and the stories that give them meaning. Beneath the fairy tale landscape of Cappadocia, where wind-carved spires and painted churches dot the horizon, lies a secret even more remarkable. Descend through narrow stone passageways, and you'll find yourself in Derinkuyu, an underground city stretching 18 levels deep, capable of sheltering 20,000 people for months at a time. This wasn't just a hideout, it was an entire mirrored world, complete with stables for livestock, communal kitchens, wine presses, and even chapels carved into the rock. The genius of these subterranean labyrinths wasn't just in their scale, but in their foresight. Hidden ventilation shafts, some plunging over 200 feet upward, ensured fresh air circulated even when the surface was unsafe. Massive circular stone doors, each weighing up to half a ton, could be rolled shut to seal off entire sections, turning corridors into fortresses. Every detail whispered the same truth. This was a society that expected crisis and engineered resilience into its very foundations. What's astonishing is how these cities functioned as ecosystems. Unlike dark, claustrophobic caves, Derinkuyu and its sister city, Kamakli, were meticulously planned. Vertical chimneys doubled as communication tubes, allowing voices to carry between levels. Wells tapped into underground aquifers, ensuring water even during sieges or droughts. Storage rooms held amphorae of oil and grains, while carefully sloped floors directed rainwater into cisterns. The layout wasn't haphazard. It was a masterclass in disaster preparedness, with living quarters radiating around central hubs like spokes on a wheel, minimizing unnecessary movement during lockdowns. Archaeologists have found evidence of metalworking stations and textile looms deep underground, proving these weren't temporary shelters but spaces designed to sustain normal life during extraordinary times. The parallels to modern challenges are impossible to ignore. As wildfires, pandemics, and political upheavals test today's cities, Cappadocia's underground networks offer a radical blueprint. Their inhabitants didn't just react to threats, they anticipated them, turning vulnerability into innovation. The soft volcanic rock, so easily eroded by weather, became their greatest asset, malleable enough to carve but stable enough to withstand centuries. There's poetry in that, a landscape shaped by ancient eruptions ultimately providing refuge from later storms. Yet the most profound lesson lies in the social cohesion these spaces required. Maintaining air shafts, managing food stores, coordinating in darkness, none of this could work without trust and collective responsibility. The very act of digging downward, away from sunlight and open skies, demanded a shared commitment to community survival. In an age where prepping often conjures images of solitary bunkers stockpiled with canned goods, Cappadocia's cities stand as a counterpoint. Their strength came not from isolation, but from interconnection, a reminder that the best defenses aren't just physical, but social. Today, as architects experiment with underground greenhouses and disaster-proof vertical farms, they're echoing solutions pioneered millennia ago. The stone mills that ground grain beneath Cappadocia foreshadow modern energy-efficient designs. The passive ventilation systems mirror contemporary sustainable architecture. Even the psychological touches, like carving faux wooden beams and decorative niches into rock walls to mimic surface homes, reveal an ancient understanding of how to make necessity feel like normalcy. Walking these tunnels now, you can almost hear the echoes of a civilization that refused to be passive victims of circumstance. They didn't just endure, they reimagined what a city could be, not just above ground but within it. In their shadows, we're left with a haunting question. As our own world grows more unpredictable, will we build walls to keep dangers out or dig deeper together to ensure no one gets left behind? Alexandria's streets didn't just intersect at right angles, they formed the lattice of an intellectual revolution. Picture this, a city laid out like a chessboard, where every straight boulevard led not just to markets or temples, but to the most audacious idea of the ancient world, the Great Library. Founded by Alexander the Great in 331 BCE, this wasn't just another Mediterranean port. It was a manifesto in marble, a declaration that urban spaces could shape minds as much as they organized bodies. The library's very location at the crossroads of the city's main thoroughfares sent a clear message. Knowledge wasn't a luxury tucked away in some cloistered corner. It was the beating heart of civic life. What set Alexandria apart wasn't just its famous library, but how the entire city seemed engineered to feed it. That meticulous grid of streets, it wasn't just about military efficiency or real estate plots, though it excelled at both. It was about creating a flow of ideas as smooth as the Nile's current. Scholars from Athens, Babylon, and India could dock their ships at the bustling harbor, walk straight up the Canopic Way, and find themselves at the library's doors within minutes, their scrolls and star charts ready to be copied and debated. The city's design eliminated friction between discovery and dissemination, turning chance encounters between mathematicians and physicians into collaborations that would redefine science. The library itself was an architectural metaphor for Alexandria's ethos. Unlike temples that soared toward the heavens or palaces that sprawled to display power, this was a building designed for horizontal exchange, its halls lined with pigeonhole shelves for scrolls, its courtyards buzzing with arguments in a dozen languages. The famous museum wasn't just a research center, it was the ancient equivalent of a startup incubator, where philosophers dined at communal tables funded by the royal treasury, their only mandate to think boldly. In this environment, Euclid codified geometry, Eratosthenes calculated the Earth's circumference, and Archimedes probably scribbled his eureka moments onto papyrus scraps. Yet Alexandria's true genius lay in its synthesis of order and openness. The same grid that brought regimented clarity also created permeable boundaries between cultures. Jewish scholars debated Greek philosophers in the shadow of Egyptian temples. Persian astronomy mingled with Babylonian mathematics in workshops along the harbor. This wasn't multiculturalism as we think of it today. It was something more radical, a recognition that knowledge had no native language or singular origin. The city's layout physically embodied this, with the Greek quarter, Egyptian district, and Jewish neighborhood all equidistant from the library, their contributions flowing into a shared intellectual reservoir. Modern smart cities could learn from Alexandria's example. Today's urban planners obsess over traffic algorithms and Wi-Fi coverage, but how many design streets to maximize serendipitous genius? The cafes where Hemingway and Fitzgerald once argued have given way to sterile co-working spaces. Alexandria reminds us that innovation hubs aren't just about bandwidth and beanbags, they're about creating collisions between disciplines, about positioning the poet's stroll to cross the engineer's commute. When the city's lighthouse guided ships into port, it wasn't just saving sailors, it was drawing the world's curiosity into a single luminous orbit. The tragedy, of course, is how much we've lost. The library's eventual destruction, whether by fire or gradual neglect, wasn't just the loss of scrolls, but of a model for how cities can cultivate collective brilliance. Yet its ghost lingers in places like MIT's Infinite Corridor or Berlin's Museum Island, where purposeful design still nudges strangers into collaborators. Alexandria's stones whisper a challenge. A city's greatness isn't measured by its skyline, but by the ideas it elevates from chance encounters to enduring truths. The grid was just the grid, but the minds it connected, those changed everything. Karakoram's streets didn't just lead somewhere, they transformed with the seasons. Imagine a capital where the emperor's palace stood firm in stone while entire neighborhoods of felt tents could vanish overnight, packed onto ox carts as swiftly as the Mongol cavalry changed course. This wasn't a city fighting against nomadism, it was a city celebrating it, a rare urban experiment where mobility and permanence weren't opposites but partners. At its height in the 13th century, Karakoram pulsed with a rhythm unlike any other metropolis. Merchants from Venice haggled over silks in brick-lined bazaars, while herders from the steppes tethered horses to temporary corrals, their jurs rising like mushrooms after rain. The city's genius lay in its refusal to choose between settled and nomadic, between empire and wilderness, between the hunger for grandeur and the freedom to move. Look closer at that layout. The permanent structures, the Great Wall, the Silver Fountain, the Buddhist temples formed an anchored core, but the spaces between them breathed. Wide avenues designed for mass encampments could host thousands of tents during festivals, then revert to empty thoroughfares when clans dispersed. Storage pits lined with brick held grain for winter, while above ground, wooden platforms allowed jurs to be pitched without damaging the earth beneath. This wasn't just tolerance for nomads, it was infrastructure engineered for their way of life. Even the famed Silver Tree Fountain, with its pipes dispensing mare's milk and wine, served dual purposes, a marvel for foreign ambassadors, a practical reservoir for herders. What feels most revolutionary is how Karakoram inverted urban assumptions. While most cities grow denser and more rigid over time, this was a capital designed to expand and contract like a lung. When Urjade Khan summoned his subjects for Kurultai, the great assemblies that decided the fate of empires, the population could swell fivefold in weeks, then shrink back just as fast. The city didn't just accommodate flux, it thrived on it. Its economy built not on rigid guilds but on the constant influx of tribute and talent from every corner of the known world. A Persian architect might design a temple while a Uyghur scribe kept records in Mongol script, their collaborations as temporary and as vital as the city itself. Modern planners grappling with climate migration might take notes. Karakoram's blend of fixed and flexible spaces anticipated today's pop-up urbanism, where temporary housing and modular infrastructure respond to shifting populations. Its refusal to privilege stone over felt, to value permanence over adaptability, feels eerily prescient in an era where rising seas and wildfires force cities to rethink rigidity. There's poetry in how a Mongol capital built for horse lords now whispers lessons to coastal megacities. That resilience might mean knowing when to stay and when to move, that a city's strength isn't just in its walls, but in its ability to dissolve and reform like a constellation. Yet Karakoram's legacy isn't just practical, it's philosophical. In a world where cities often define themselves by what they exclude, walls against invaders, zoning against change, this was a capital that embraced contradictions. The same openness that made it vibrant also made it ephemeral. By the 14th century, the grasslands had reclaimed much of the site, but that was never failure. The Mongols hadn't built for eternity. They'd built for possibility, a city as boundless as the horizon, as restless as the wind that still sighs through its ruins. Carcassonne's double walls didn't just keep invaders out, they choreographed daily life with military precision. Picture walking through the Narbonne Gate, its towering barbican forcing visitors into a zigzag path under the watchful eyes of archers. Every stone in this medieval fortress city served dual purposes. The outer wall's rounded towers deflected siege engines while their hollow bases stored grain. Murder holes above gateways could rain boiling oil, yet also ventilate bustling market stalls below. This wasn't just defense, it was urban design as chess game, where protection and community moved in careful balance. Within those formidable ramparts, the city pulsed with unexpected vibrancy. Narrow streets fanned out from the central Chateau-Comtal like spokes, ensuring quick troop movement, but also creating natural gathering spots where blacksmiths' hammers rang against armor by day, and troubadours' lutes echoed off the stones by night. The Basilica of Saints Nazarius and Celsus rose not in isolated splendor, but wedged between bakeries and tanneries, its stained glass scattering light onto merchants haggling over Catalan wool. Carcassonne's genius lay in making fortification feel organic rather than oppressive, a place where children played hopscotch on arrow-straight cobblestones designed for rapid mustering of militia. Modern planners still grapple with this tension between openness and security. Compare Carcassonne's concentric barriers to today's hostile architecture, benches with armrests to deter sleeping, or parks with motion-activated sprinklers. The medieval city achieved safety through integration rather than exclusion, its walls creating permeable layers of trust. Residents underwent scrutiny at outer gates but moved freely within, their daily rhythms synchronized with century changes. When the evening trumpet signaled Portcullis' closure, it wasn't just curfew, it was communal rhythm, as reliable as the bakers firing their ovens at dawn. The real lesson lies in Carcassonne's adaptability. Those famously intimidating battlements weren't static. Successive generations updated murder holes for crossbow tactics, transformed outer baileys into vineyards during peacetime, and converted siege tunnels into cool wine cellars. This flexibility speaks directly to contemporary challenges, how bulletproof glass in schools might coexist with welcoming lobbies, or how surveillance could protect without alienating. The stones whisper that the best defenses don't just repel threats but nurture what they shield. Perhaps that's why tourists today don't just gawk at Carcassonne's military might but linger in its cobbled squares, sipping Languedoc wine where guards once stood watch. The true test of defensive urbanism isn't measured in sieges survived but in lives flourished between the walls. When twilight paints those ancient towers gold, the city doesn't feel like a relic, it feels like a revelation. proving that the strongest barriers are those that disappear into the fabric of everyday life. The Golden Age of Timbuktu wasn't measured in caravans of salt or gold, but in the weight of ink on paper. Beneath the scorching Saharan sun, this fabled city harbored something far more precious than material wealth. Hundreds of thousands of manuscripts, their pages teeming with astronomy treatises, legal commentaries, and poetic verses in flowing Arabic script. These weren't just books, they were the lifeblood of an urban experiment where scholars held the same status as kings, and libraries stood taller than palaces. While Europe languished in its so-called Dark Ages, Timbuktu's Angkor University buzzed with debates about medicine, mathematics, and philosophy, its courtyard shaded by the branches of knowledge rather than the swords of conquest. What made Timbuktu extraordinary wasn't just the volume of its texts, but how they shaped the city's very fabric. Unlike Alexandria's centralized library, Timbuktu's knowledge lived in the homes of ordinary citizens, each family guarding chests of manuscripts passed down like heirlooms. Walk its dusty streets in the 15th century, and you might find a merchant discussing Aristotle with a visiting scholar from Fez, while a tailor's apprentice copied astronomical charts by candlelight. The city's architecture reflected this democratization of learning. The pyramidal design of Angkor's minaret mirrored the structure of scholarly knowledge, ascending from broad foundations to specialized pinnacles, while private libraries doubled as community schools where children memorized verses alongside multiplication tables. The real revolution lay in the manuscript's diversity. Pages penned in Songhai, Tuareg, and Fulani languages proved that African intellectual traditions weren't oral footnotes to written history, but sophisticated systems in dialogue with Islamic and classical thought. A single leather-bound volume might juxtapose herbal remedies from the Niger Delta with Persian algebra, its margins filled with generations of annotations, a medieval version of peer review. This was globalization of the mind centuries before the term existed, where a scholar in Timbuktu could reference a text from Granada while critiquing a theory from Baghdad. Modern, smart cities obsessed with data streams might pause at Timbuktu's model. Without a single digital sensor, its residents created a living network of knowledge, where caravans carried ideas as readily as goods, and the value of a home was measured in the depth of its bookshelves. The city thrived not on surveillance but on shared curiosity, its security resting not in walls but in the collective determination to preserve learning through droughts and invasions. When Moroccan armies sacked Timbuktu in the 16th century, its greatest treasures survived because families buried them in desert caves or sewed them into camel saddles, proof that the most resilient infrastructure isn't made of stone but of stories. Today, as technicians scramble to back up humanity's digital heritage against cyber threats, Timbuktu's legacy whispers across the centuries. Its manuscripts, rescued from obscurity in the 21st century by librarians risking jihadist threats, remind us that a city's true wealth isn't in its algorithms or skyscrapers, but in its capacity to keep ideas alive through the storms of history. The sand may have crept over Timbuktu's courtyards, but the questions inked on those brittle pages about justice, about the stars, about what it means to build a society worthy of its thinkers refuse to fade. In an age drowning in information but starving for wisdom, that's a light no desert can extinguish. Babylon's hanging gardens weren't just a spectacle, they were a radical statement about what a city could be. Picture terraced greenery spilling over arched stone walkways, a lush oasis rising above the Euphrates like a mirage made real. While historians still debate their exact location, the legend endures because it captures something profound. Babylon didn't just coexist with nature, it celebrated it, turning cultivation into high art. These gardens weren't mere decoration. They were infrastructure, a living system that cooled the air, fed the populace, and transformed the city into a breathing organism. In a world where modern skylines often feel like concrete deserts, Babylon's vision whispers an urgent question: what if cities didn't conquer nature but conspired with it? The genius of Babylon's design lay in its refusal to separate function from beauty. The garden's tiered structure wasn't just visually striking, it maximized shade and minimized water waste, with each level filtering runoff to the one below. Aqueducts and screw pumps lifted water from the river, not just to impress visitors but to sustain fruit trees and medicinal herbs used in daily life. Even the famed Ishtar Gate, with its cobalt tiles and golden lions, doubled as a climate moderator, its thick walls buffering against the Mesopotamian heat. This wasn't sustainability as an afterthought. It was woven into the city's DNA, where every brick served both practical and poetic purposes. Compare this to today's urban sprawl, where parks are often relegated to leftover spaces between developments. Babylon's planners would have scoffed at the idea of green spaces as isolated pockets in a grey grid. For them, agriculture wasn't outsourced to distant farms. It climbed the walls of palaces and spilled across rooftops. Date palms shaded market squares, their fronds rustling above merchants haggling over spices and textiles. Courtyards doubled as herb gardens, perfuming the air with mint and saffron. The city didn't just tolerate nature, it invited nature to the table, recognizing that soil and stone could be collaborators rather than competitors. The lesson here isn't about recreating hanging gardens with modern steel and glass. It's about reimagining the relationship between built environments and living systems. Urban farms on Singapore's skyscrapers, Milan's vertical forest towers, even the humble balcony gardens of Barcelona, all are heirs to Babylon's ethos. What changes when we see a vine-covered facade not as untidy but as insulation? When stormwater channels become cascading floral displays, Babylon's ruins remind us that the divide between urban and rural is a choice, not a law. But perhaps the most subversive part of Babylon's legacy is its democratization of greenery. Unlike the private pleasure gardens of later empires, the hanging gardens were said to be visible from across the city, their bounty a shared spectacle. In an age when rooftop gardens often crown luxury penthouses, this feels revolutionary. The city's grandeur wasn't hoarded by elites. It rose into the skyline for all to enjoy, a daily reminder that beauty and utility could belong to everyone. The irony: Babylon's gardens thrived in one of Earth's harshest climates, proving that even in adversity, cities can flourish when they work with, not against, their environment. As temperatures rise and concrete jungles bake, that lesson grows more vital. The hanging gardens may be dust now, but their vision lingers, a city that doesn't just survive, but blooms. Chaco Canyon's roads stretch across the New Mexico desert like ghostly threads, straight as arrows, vanishing into horizons with eerie precision. These weren't ordinary thoroughfares. No wheel ruts or trade goods clutter their paths. Instead, they cut through rock and mesa with almost ceremonial determination, connecting great houses like Pueblo Bonito to distant outposts over 60 miles away. What's astonishing isn't just their scale, but their purpose. These weren't trade routes or military highways. They were sacred pathways, engineered not for carts or commerce, but for processions, pilgrimages, and the movement of something far more elusive: belief. Walk one of these roads today, and you'll notice something uncanny. Many align perfectly with celestial events: the summer solstice sunrise, the lunar standstill, suggesting they functioned as terrestrial mirrors of cosmic order. The Great North Road, for instance, points unerringly toward the sacred mountain of Huacan Mesa, a place of spiritual significance to Pueblo peoples. But here's the twist: some roads lead nowhere tangible, terminating abruptly at cliffs or barren plateaus. Archaeologists now believe these were symbolic routes, meant not for physical travel but for spiritual journeys, connecting the living world with the ancestral realm. Choco's builders didn't just construct a city, they wove an entire landscape into a ritual network, blurring the line between urban center and sacred hinterland. This redefines what a city can be. While modern urbanism obsesses over density and zoning, Choco's model challenges us to think of cities as constellations, nodes linked not by subway lines but by shared meaning. The great houses weren't just dwellings, they were anchors in a vast ceremonial web, their doorways and windows aligned to frame celestial events visible from distant sister sites. A ceremony begun at Pueblo Alto might culminate days later at Aztec ruins 70 miles north, with participants traversing roads that doubled as ceremonial stages. The city didn't stop at its outermost building. It pulsed along those slender roads, alive in every footfall of a dancer or pilgrim. The engineering reveals deeper layers of intention. Unlike Roman roads built for speed, Choco's pathways often ignore topography, scaling cliffs instead of winding around them. This wasn't inefficiency, it was ritual necessity. The act of ascending a steep road mirrored spiritual ascent, transforming travel into meditation. Even the road's construction held symbolic weight. Bordered by low stone walls or lined with crushed pottery shards, they glittered under moonlight, turning night journeys into walks through a star field. Modern cities craving connection could learn from Choco's playbook. Our highways isolate, theirs united. Our infrastructure prioritizes efficiency, theirs wove efficiency with transcendence. Imagine if today's urban greenways doubled as seasonal observatories, or if bike paths aligned with solstice sunsets, turning commutes into communal rituals. The genius of Choco wasn't in its stonework, but in its vision of a city inseparable from its cultural and celestial context. A reminder that the most enduring metropolises aren't just built on land, but on stories, and that roads can carry more than cargo when they're paved with purpose. Yet Choco's roads also whisper a warning. Their abandonment around the 12th century coincides with climate shifts and social fractures, a reminder that even the most spiritual connections falter when ecological balance fails. As drought parched the southwest, the ceremonies that once animated those pathways may have faded, leaving only stones to mark where faith once flowed. That's the paradox haunting these ghostly trails. They show us how to build cities that transcend stone, even as they stand as monuments to the fragility of all human endeavors. The roads remain, waiting not for feet, but for the return of the meaning that once made them sacred. Göbekli Tepe doesn't just predate cities, it shatters the timeline of human civilization altogether. Picture this: towering limestone pillars carved with intricate animal reliefs, arranged in concentric circles, standing sentinel over the Turkish plains since roughly 9,600 BCE. That's 6,000 years older than Stonehenge, 7 millennia before the pyramids. But here's what's truly staggering: this wasn't some isolated temple. The site's multiple enclosures, each buried ceremonially before a new one was built, suggest something revolutionary. A gathering place for hunter-gatherer societies who supposedly hadn't yet discovered agriculture or permanent settlements. Those silent stones whisper a radical idea that the human impulse to come together and create may have preceded the need for cities, not the other way around. Look closer at those T-shaped pillars. Some weigh over 16 tons, their precise carving and transport requiring coordination that archaeologists once thought impossible for nomadic peoples. Yet there's no evidence of slavery or forced labor here. Instead, the bones of wild game and remnants of feasts hint at communal effort fueled by shared purpose. This wasn't a city in the traditional sense, no houses, no granaries, but it was urban in spirit, a place where scattered bands converged to build something greater than themselves. The pillars themselves tell the story. Their carving scorpions, foxes, vultures aren't just art, they're a visual language, a way to bind diverse groups through shared myth. In essence, Göbekli Tepe was humanity's first networking hub, where ideas traded hands as readily as flint tools. What's earth-shaking about this discovery is how it flips the script on urban origins. For decades, we've been taught a tidy narrative. Humans settled down to farm, surplus food allowed specialization, and then came monuments and complex society. But Göbekli Tepe turns that sequence inside out. Here, the spiritual and social came first, the need to gather, to create meaning, to align with cosmic rhythms through architecture. Only later, the theory goes, did these gatherings necessitate reliable food sources, potentially sparking the domestication of wheat and barley found wild in the surrounding hills. The city didn't birth the temple may have birthed the city. Modern urban planners could learn from this ancient blueprint. While today's cities obsess over zoning and efficiency, Göbekli Tepe reminds us that the soul of a place lies in its ability to foster connection. Those stone circles weren't just ritual spaces, they were social glue, drawing people across vast distances to collaborate on something transcendent. Imagine if our own city centers prioritized awe and belonging over retail square footage, if skyscrapers carved with shared stories replaced blank glass towers. The site's deliberate burials also speak volumes. Each enclosure was carefully interred with thousands of tons of rubble, preserved like a time capsule. There's profound respect in that act, a recognition that spaces hold meaning long after their use expires. Yet the greatest lesson might be in Göbekli Tepe's abandonment. After 1,500 years of continuous use, the site was voluntarily buried and left behind. Not to drought, not to war, but perhaps because its purpose had been fulfilled, the ideas it incubated had spread, the communities it united had grown into new forms. In an age where cities cling to relevance through brute force, there's wisdom in that graceful exit. The stones didn't crumble, they were sung to sleep, their work done. As we dig deeper into the origins of urban life, we're left with a humbling thought. Maybe the first city wasn't a place to live at all, but a place to remember, and in remembering, to become something more together than we could ever be apart. Venice didn't just rise from the sea, it outsmarted it. Picture a city where streets flow with salt water, where foundations rest on forests of submerged timber, where every palace doorway opens directly onto a liquid highway. This wasn't urban planning, it was high-wire improvisation on a grand scale. The Venetians didn't have the luxury of stable ground, so they invented stability. Driving millions of alderwood piles resistant to rot in oxygen pour mud through silt and clay until they hit the compressed sand of ancient riverbeds. These hidden forests still hold up the city today, petrified by centuries of mineral-rich tides into something sturdier than stone. But here's the twist: Venice's genius wasn't just in defying nature, but in harnessing it. Those winding canals weren't obstacles. They were the original public transit system, with gondolas and barges moving goods faster than any medieval cart could through crowded mainland streets. The city's layout reveals even deeper cunning. Unlike rigid Roman grids or concentric walled cities, Venice sprawls like a living organism, its districts shaped by tidal currents and shifting sandbanks. The Grand Canal snakes through its heart not as a showpiece, but as a hydraulic regulator, its gentle curves slowing the Adriatic's fierce acqua alta floods while allowing boat traffic to flow unimpeded. Bridges arch high enough to let vessels pass beneath, yet their steps are spaced for easy unloading. Even the iconic palazzos with their water gates and mooring posts were designed as multimodal hubs. Merchants could unload spices from Alexandria directly into warehouse basements, then host dignitaries in gilded halls above, all without a single staircase. What's astonishing is how Venice weaponized its vulnerability. With no farmland or forests, it turned trade into its lifeline, engineering an empire of commerce rather than conquest. The Arsenal shipyard, a marvel of pre-industrial mass production, could launch a fully armed galley in a single day by standardizing parts and organizing labor like a Renaissance-era assembly line. Salt harvested from lagoon flats became currency, funding voyages that stretched to Constantinople and beyond. Venice's survival depended not on stockpiling resources, but on perfecting the art of connection, a lesson for modern cities in an age of supply chain shocks. Yet Venice's true legacy lies in its social innovations. The city's unique governance system, with its elected doge and checks against tyranny, fostered a merchant aristocracy where wealth came from enterprise rather than land. Its census records from the 1300s tracked births, deaths, and even maritime losses with bureaucratic precision, an early data network that helped manage crises like plagues and invasions. The Rialto market wasn't just a bazaar, it was the Wall Street of its day, with traders pioneering concepts like insurance and debt bonds. All this emerged not despite the water, but because of it, the lagoon's isolation, forcing Venetians to invent new ways of living together. Modern cities facing rising seas might look to Venice's playbook. The most flood barriers, for all their controversy, echo ancient solutions like the Republic's diversion of entire rivers to protect the lagoon's delicate balance. Architects now study Venetian palaces' dual-layer foundations, brick underwater, lighter materials above, as models for climate-resilient construction. But the deeper takeaway isn't technical, it's philosophical. Venice thrived by treating water as collaborator rather than enemy, by building institutions as adaptable as its infrastructure. When tourists today glide past Byzantine mosaics and Gothic arches, they're not just seeing beauty, they're floating through a 1,000-year-old experiment in urban improvisation, where every wave-worn step whispers the same truth. Cities don't need solid ground to stand the test of time, just solid ingenuity. Angkor Wat's towers may pierce the Cambodian sky like stone lotus buds, but the real marvel lies beneath your feet, an empire disguised as a temple. Stretch your gaze beyond the iconic spires, and you'll uncover a metropolis larger than modern Paris, its grid of canals and reservoirs pulsing with hydraulic genius. This wasn't just a sacred complex, it was a living organism engineered to dance between monsoon floods and dry season droughts, where every drop of water served both body and soul. The barrays, those massive rectangular reservoirs, did more than irrigate rice paddies for 1 million inhabitants. They mirrored celestial oceans from Hindu cosmology, turning practical infrastructure into sacred geography. A farmer tending his crops in the shadow of these waters wasn't just growing food, he was participating in a cosmic cycle older than the stones themselves. Walk the causeways flanked by Naga balustrades, and you're tracing the Khmer Empire's masterstroke, a city where spirituality and survival shared the same blueprint. The East Barray, spanning 5 square miles, wasn't merely a cistern, it was a liquid mandala, its dimensions aligning with astronomical events. During the spring equinox, sunlight would strike the central temple's prang at the precise angle to ignite golden reflections across the water, transforming the reservoir into a shimmering pathway to the divine. Meanwhile, underground channels fed communal pools where villagers bathed alongside priests, their daily ablutions blending hygiene with ritual purification. Angkor's planners didn't compartmentalize the sacred and the mundane. They wove them together like threads in a silk sampot. The city's road network reveals even deeper layers of intentionality. Unlike Roman highways prioritizing military speed, Angkor's avenues meandered to connect temple complexes with hospital chapels, rest houses, and healing gardens. Travelers didn't just move from point A to B, they journeyed through a landscape of care where shaded rest stops doubled as meditation spaces and bridges featured carvings of medicinal plants. This was urban planning as compassionate architecture, recognizing that a society's strength lay not just in its grand monuments, but in how it nurtured the weary bodies that built them. Modern cities drowning in concrete could learn from Angkor's fluid intelligence. While we pump groundwater until land subsides, the KHMers harvested every raindrop through intricate spillways and sedimentation tanks that filtered water before it reached reservoirs. Their system was so precise that modern hydrologists using LiDAR technology discovered previously unknown canals still influencing water tables today. But the lesson isn't just technical, it's philosophical. Angkor thrived for 6 centuries not by conquering nature, but by composing with it, treating water as both resource and deity. When the city eventually declined, it wasn't engineering failure but a spiritual one overwhelmed by shifting trade routes and a royal elite who forgot that even stone needs reverence to endure. The haunting beauty of Angkor's ruins today lies in their stubborn refusal to be just relics. Strangler figs may grip temple walls, but the old reservoirs still regulate floods for nearby villages. Monks still chant in corridors where celestial dancers once twirled in stone. The city's true genius wasn't in resisting time, but in designing systems so harmonious they echo beyond their creators. As climate change tightens its grip, Angkor whispers across 9 centuries. The cities that last aren't those that tower highest, but those that listen, to the land, to the stars, to the sacred in every sip of water. Ephesus didn't just fade from glory, it was slowly strangled by the land itself. Picture a metropolis where merchant ships once docked beside grand colonnades, unloading silks from Persia and papyrus from Egypt. Today, those same marble streets sit silent, stranded miles from the sea, their wharves buried under centuries of silt. This isn't the familiar tale of invaders or earthquakes, but something far more insidious. A city outmaneuvered by the slow creep of river sediment and the stubborn retreat of the Aegean coastline. The ruins of Ephesus don't just showcase ancient grandeur. They're a stark lesson in what happens when urban planning ignores the whispers of geology. The irony cuts deep. Ephesus thrived precisely because of its relationship with water. The Cayster River fed its harbors and fertilized its hinterlands, while the sea brought wealth from across the Mediterranean. Yet that same river carried the seeds of the city's undoing. Every flood deposited layers of silt, gradually shallowing the harbor. Engineers dredged channels and built retaining walls, but nature always had the final say. By the Byzantine era, ships could no longer reach the city's once bustling docks. Trade routes withered, marshes bred malaria, and Ephesus, once a rival to Rome and Alexandria, became a shadow clinging to receding waters. What's haunting is how avoidable this collapse might have been. Archaeologists have uncovered evidence of repeated warnings, harbors abandoned and rebuilt farther seaward, canals choked with debris. The city's leaders weren't blind to the threat, they simply underestimated its inevitability. Sound familiar, modern megacities from Jakarta to New Orleans face eerily similar battles: rising seas, sinking land, and the temptation to engineer short-term fixes rather than confront painful truths. Ephesus had the resources to adapt, but not the will to transform. Its engineers could move statues and temples, but not the bureaucracy needed to relocate an entire city. Yet Ephesus's story isn't just one of failure. Walk its marble-paved Curate Street today, and you'll notice something remarkable. The Library of Celsus still stands tall, its facade meticulously reconstructed. The Great Theatre, carved into the hillside, still hosts concerts after 2 millennia. These landmarks survived not because they resisted change, but because they were repurposed. The library became a fountain house, the theatre a fortress. The city's bones found new life even as its original function faded. There's wisdom in that resilience. The real tragedy lies in the alternatives not taken. Just a few miles west, the island of Samos thrived by embracing its shifting coastline, building floating docks that rose and fell with sea levels. Other ports in the region relocated entirely, following the shoreline like hermit crabs trading shells. Ephesus clung to its sinking site, betting on human ingenuity over humility. That choice turned a bustling port into a landlocked museum, a cautionary tale written in stone and silt. As coastal cities today grapple with climate change, Ephesus whispers a question across the centuries. When the water comes for your streets, will you fight the tide or learn to swim? Its ruins don't just belong to archaeologists. They belong to every planner staring down rising sea level projections, every mayor weighing expensive relocations against nostalgic stubbornness. The marble columns may be silent, but their message is deafening. Cities aren't monuments. They're conversations with the earth, and nature always gets the last word. Plato's Republic wasn't just philosophical musing. It was the world's first urban design manifesto disguised as a dialogue. Picture Socrates and his students debating not just justice, but the physical contours of a city where every alleyway would cultivate virtue. The philosopher's vision of concentric rings, artisans on the outskirts, guardians in the middle, philosopher kings at the sacred center, wasn't merely about social hierarchy. It was an attempt to encode morality into pavement stones and plaza layouts, believing the right geometry could shape citizens like a potter's wheel shapes clay. While no ancient builder ever erected Plato's ideal city, his blueprint haunted urban planners for millennia, whispering that a metropolis could be more than bricks and roads. It could be a machine for manufacturing goodness. Fast forward to Renaissance Florence, where architect Filaret sketched Esforzinda, a star-shaped utopia bursting with radial symmetry. Those geometrically perfect streets weren't just aesthetic whims, they were mathematical prayers for harmony, each angle calibrated to reflect cosmic order. Leon Battista Alberti took it further, arguing in his architectural treatises that buildings should follow the proportions of the human body, a column's height matching a man's, a piazza's width mirroring the spread of arms. These weren't just design rules, they were attempts to make cities feel like natural extensions of ourselves, where every archway and avenue resonated with biological familiarity. Yet the most poignant thing about these unrealized cities isn't their idealism, it's their stubborn refusal to die. When Spanish colonists laid out Santa Fe's Plaza in the early 1600s, they followed the laws of the Indies, a royal decree demanding grid patterns with central squares for communal life. Centuries later, Ebenezer Howard's Garden City movement revived Plato's circular districts as green belts and radial boulevards. Even Le Corbusier's stark modernist towers owed debts to Renaissance proportionality, their pilotis and roof gardens echoing Alberti's human-centered ideals. The ghosts of these unfinished visions linger in every bike lane and pedestrian plaza, proving that failed utopias often succeed as seeds. What modern planners often miss is how these ancient dreamers balanced rigor with resilience. Plato's Republic allowed for musical education to soften its rigid structure. Alberti insisted neighborhoods needed delight as much as order. Today's sustainable city initiatives could learn from that duality. Solar panels and sewage systems matter, but so do the intangible rhythms that make urban life sing. When Copenhagen prioritizes Hygge in its public spaces or Bogota reserves Sundays for ciclovia street festivals, they're channeling a truth those Renaissance thinkers knew. A city's soul isn't in its blueprints, but in its capacity for joy. The ultimate lesson from these lost ideals: perfection wasn't the point. Like a compass that always points north but never reaches it, these visions gave direction more than destination. When we walk through a tree-lined boulevard or linger in a thoughtfully designed park, we're strolling through the afterlife of dreams that never fully materialized and yet never fully disappeared. The measure of a city's greatness isn't whether it achieves utopia, but how faithfully it keeps reaching. Ancient cities whisper urgent lessons through the cracks in their ruins, lessons modern planners are only now beginning to decode. Take the humble Stoa of Athens, those shaded colonnades where philosophy flourished alongside fruit vendors. Today's sterile shopping malls and isolated office parks could learn from this seamless blend of commerce and conversation. The Greeks understood something we've forgotten. Public spaces aren't just for moving through, they're for lingering, debating, and weaving the social fabric that makes cities resilient. Contrast this with the loneliness of suburban sprawl, where garage doors open directly into private sanctuaries and sidewalks lead nowhere meaningful. Our ancestors built cities to connect, we've built them to separate. Sustainability wasn't an afterthought for the ancients, it was survival. The Nabateans of Petra didn't just tolerate their desert environment, they celebrated it, turning scarce rainfall into cascading fountains and hidden cisterns. Their water systems worked with gravity and geology rather than against them, a stark contrast to today's energy-guzzling desalination plants. Modern cities pump water hundreds of miles across mountain ranges, losing nearly a quarter to leaky pipes. Meanwhile, the buried Khanats of Persia still channel groundwater efficiently after 3,000 years, their gently sloping tunnels requiring no electricity, just an intimate understanding of the land's contours. The difference: ancient engineers saw themselves as partners with nature, not conquerors of it. Adaptability might be the most vital lesson etched into these buried stones. Mohenjo-Daro's uniform bricks tell of a society prepared to rebuild after predictable floods, while Venice's floating foundations embraced instability as a design feature. Compare this to Miami's high-rise districts, where billion-dollar towers stand on porous limestone as seas rise. The Khmer Empire's barrays, those massive reservoirs around Angkor, could expand or contract with seasonal rains, functioning as both spiritual symbols and pragmatic water banks. Today's concrete jungles lack this flexibility. Zoning laws freeze neighborhoods in amber while climate shifts demand constant reinvention. Ancient cities thrived because they expected change. Ours falter because we assume permanence. Yet the most profound revelation lies in how these cities balanced individual needs with collective good. Teotihuacan's apartment compounds mixed social classes around shared courtyards, fostering interdependence. Timbuktu's manuscripts were guarded not in a single vulnerable library, but dispersed through hundreds of homes, creating a distributed network of knowledge. Modern urbanism, obsessed with privatization and security, has eroded these bonds. Gated communities replace communal wells, while surveillance cameras substitute for neighborly trust. The pandemic laid this bare. When crisis hit, cities with strong social fabrics fared better than those where residents barely knew each other's names. The path forward isn't about copying ancient techniques verbatim, but rediscovering their underlying wisdom. Imagine a Los Angeles where storm channels mimic Nabatean aqueducts, transforming flash floods into public gardens. Picture a Dubai that learns from Cappadocia, carving climate-responsive spaces into its bedrock rather than glass towers requiring endless AC. Envision neighborhoods that, like the Agora, blend markets, schools, and governance into vibrant hubs rather than isolating them in sterile districts. These aren't nostalgic fantasies, they're urgent innovations disguised as homecomings. What makes these ancient models so compelling is their holistic vision. They didn't treat housing, transportation, and ecology as separate puzzles but as interconnected systems. Chaco Canyon's roads weren't just pathways but celestial markers. Venice's canals weren't just waterways but public squares. Modern urbanism, fractured by specialization, could take cues from this integration. The buried cities challenge us to think beyond sustainability checklists, to design spaces that don't just minimize harm but actively heal, that don't just house bodies but nourish souls. Their greatest gift isn't in the stones they left behind, but in the mindsets we forgot. That cities are living ecosystems, that resilience springs from connection, and that the best foundations are those laid with humility and foresight. The sand has preserved their secrets long enough. Now it's our turn to listen. The secrets beneath the sand aren't just relics, they're conversations waiting to be resumed. Every cobblestone in Ephesus, every brick in Mohenjo-Daro carries the imprint of choices made centuries ago. Choices about how to live together, how to share resources, how to build beauty into the bones of daily life. These ancient planners faced challenges startlingly similar to ours: rising waters, scarce resources, the tension between growth and sustainability. Yet they approach them with a creativity that puts our concrete jungles to shame. The difference: they saw cities not as machines for efficiency, but as ecosystems, living, breathing entities where every element, from temple to sewer, had multiple roles to play. Take Venice's marriage with water, an embrace rather than a battle. While modern coastal cities pour billions into seawalls and pumps, the Venetians worked with the tides, letting them dictate the rhythm of trade, transportation, even architecture. Or consider the ancestral Pueblones of Chaco Canyon, who turned harsh desert into sacred geography by aligning roads with celestial events, making cosmology practical. These weren't just technical solutions, they were philosophical ones, rooted in the understanding that a city's resilience comes from aligning with natural laws rather than defying them. There's humility in this approach we've largely lost. When the Khmer engineers at Angkor designed reservoirs that doubled as spiritual symbols, or when the Nabateans carved Petra's water channels to follow the land's natural contours, they acknowledged something profound: human ambition must partner with environmental reality. Contrast this with our modern tendency to flatten hills for subdivisions or drain wetlands for shopping malls, as if geography were merely an inconvenience to be overcome. The buried cities whisper that adaptation isn't surrender, it's wisdom. Yet the most urgent lesson isn't about engineering, it's about community. Walk through the ruins of Teotihuacán and you'll notice something remarkable. The apartment compounds lack obvious signs of wealth disparity. The Grand Avenue of the Dead connects everyone, from farmer to priest, in a shared ceremonial landscape. Timbuktu's manuscripts weren't hoarded in elite institutions but dispersed through ordinary homes, making literacy a communal treasure. These models challenge our modern divisions: gated neighborhoods, privatized resources, isolated digital lives. They suggest that the strongest cities aren't those with the tallest towers, but those with the deepest connections. As we stand at our own urban crossroads, with climate change rewriting coastlines and technology reshaping how we interact, these ancient voices grow louder. What if we designed cities like Venice, where canals become green transport corridors, or like Cahokia, where public spaces double as astronomical calendars? The answers won't come from copying old blueprints, but from rediscovering the mindset behind them. That cities are stories we build together, stories that must bend with the land rather than break it. So let's keep digging, not just through layers of soil, but through layers of assumption. Every buried city is an invitation to rethink, to adapt, to imagine anew. The sand has preserved their secrets not as endings, but as beginnings waiting for us to take up the conversation they started centuries ago. The next chapter of urban life isn't just ours to write, it's ours to build, one humble, harmonious